Hey, this is Frank Honus, and I want to welcome you to the Pure Life Podcast, your weekly dose of encouragement, inspiration, and practical tips for living with sexual integrity through Jesus Christ. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 78 of the Pure Life Podcast. My name is Frank Honus, and I am your host. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. This week on the podcast, I want to talk about how we treat our eyes. And as we are kind of recovering from a sexual addiction, hopefully you are pursuing sexual purity and sexual integrity, we need to start to learn how to discipline our eyes. This is not really a topic that I've talked a ton about on the podcast before, but again, as people pursuing sexual purity, we need to discipline our eyes, and we need to begin thinking about what we look at and how it can affect our mind and our heart, and the kind of content that we watch, the things that we see, the things that we look at, the things our eyes are preoccupied with, whether in public or in our home. We talk a lot about pornography and masturbation and fantasy and all kinds of sexual addictions, but I want to kind of take a step back here and really address a subject and talk a little bit about a subject that every single addict obviously deals with, and that's their eyes and the kind of things we allow inside and that we look at. Here's the truth, is that you and I were created to appreciate beauty in people's lives. And what's happened is that pornography and sexually charged content, and even just people that you look at in public, if you allow your eyes to wander, all of those things pervert how we see and interact with people. And ultimately, I think it comes back to our brains. But pornography again, and lust and fantasy, all those things pervert how we see and interact with people, whether it's racy TV shows or movies, magazines, websites, etc. All this kind of content really does affect the way in which we view and look at the opposite sex. And so that's why it's really important that we talk about the eyes, and it's important that we understand how to be responsible and disciplined with our eyes. All of these things, if we're not careful, cause us to objectify. When somebody is addicted to pornography and exposes themselves to websites and people that aren't real and hardcore sexual acts, they begin to not see the person, but they begin to treat that person, the people they're seeing, as objects. And that's essentially what objectification is. We turn people into objects. And so how can we guard our eyes, our mind, and our heart against sexual objectification? Well, I want to share with you 4 kind of tips that we can kind of think about, and they all start with the word look, because as we look at things, as we look at TV shows and movies and websites, as we look at people in public, not necessarily in a sexual way, but as we observe, how can we guard our eyes from going to places that they shouldn't? How can we guard our eyes from objectifying people? So the very first thing that we have to do is we have to look up. Okay, we have to look up. And essentially it's this, very practically, when you're talking to the opposite sex, if you're in a conversation with someone, guys, you're in a conversation with girls, girls, you're in a conversation with guys, make sure you keep a checkup from the neck up. All right, and that's kind of a little bit of a cliche phrase, but really it's the truth. Don't allow your eyes to wander to places that they shouldn't, right? And kind of keep a good rule in mind that, in your personal relationships with people, number 1, look up. Keep your eyes focused on that person's, that person's face, that person's eyes. For some of you, this is going to be incredibly hard to do this, but make sure you look into the person's eyes when you're talking to them. This shows your focus is on them when they're speaking to you, and don't daydream, right? So as you're looking at them, as you're focusing on what they're saying, don't allow your mind to wander either. And so these are really tough things to start to do, but again, we're talking about how we guard our eyes. how we guard what we look at, what we watch, what we see. Number one, we look up. So keep a checkup from the neck up. When you're talking to somebody, don't allow your mind to fantasize and to wander. Don't allow your eyes to wander and to scan that person's body, right? It's just a rule, and a lot of, I think, sex addicts have problems and struggle with that. Okay, I know I once did, really majorly struggle with lusting, fantasizing, and but number one, look up. Number two, we have to look in. We have to look in. Now, remember that the person you're talking to is kind of a follow-up to look up. Number one, remember that the person you're talking to is a real person, right? They're a real person. They have a heart, they have feelings, they have emotions, and they are God's creation. So we need to treat them as such. We need to take care of, really take care of the people that we are in interaction with, and really not objectify, but embrace, in a very human way. And so we need to look into that person's life. We need to look into that person's heart. Number three, we have to look away. So when you're watching a TV show, we're kind of shifting gears a little bit here from people that we talk to in public, at work, in our interpersonal relationships. Now we're talking about inside of our home here, right? So number three, we look away. So what does this mean? When you're watching TV, for example, you're watching a movie, remember that you need to filter out a lot of junk. There's so much content that's charged with sexual content and acts of sexuality and nudity. Don't try to be a tough guy, and don't think that you can just handle it on your own. Remember, you are taking in images and video and content that is incredibly damaging to your mind and to your heart. So this might even mean for you losing cable for a season of your life, if it's a huge temptation for you. Get rid of the cable, get rid of it. But when you see those things on TV, if you see those things on TV or in movies, look away. Don't just sit there and just act like it's not a big deal, because it is a big deal. It's important what your eyes focus on. It's important on what you take in. Number four, the last one, is kind of an ideological kind of attitude that we should have, but it's look ahead. Look ahead. Have a clear vision and definition for yourself of what is acceptable and what isn't for you to look at and see. Right? Don't compromise on this. It's really important that we take a stance for purity. We take a stance on what we look at and where we go with our eyes. And so, have a vision, have a strategy, have a clear definition for yourself of what is pure and what is not. What is acceptable for me to watch and to look at on TV and movies and websites and magazines, and what isn't. And so, in our relationships with people, make sure our eyes are focused, that we're looking into that person's life, that we're treating that person like a person, that like God's creation, because that's who they are. It's about guarding our eyes and guarding our heart. A couple scriptures I want to read to you. Psalm 101:3 says, "I will not look with approval on anything that is vile. I hate what faithless people do. I will have no part in it." What is this scripture telling us? It's saying, it's interesting here that adds this one phrase, "I will not look with approval on anything that is vile." So it's implying that if you and I are looking at websites and TV and all kinds of sexual content, and we have no problem with that, then we're approving of that in our lives. We're adding approval to that. And those kinds of things the scripture says are vile. Another scripture puts it in the way of, I will refuse to look at anything that's vile and vulgar, right? So vile and vulgar kind of content. Job 31:1 says, "I made a covenant with my eyes not to look with lust at a young woman." So again, scripture says so much about our eyes and what we look at and how we treat people, that we need to just be real careful. And we need to be on guard to take care of what we look at, what we allow inside, what we allow in our eyes, and what we allow in our heart. And so just be aware of that this week. I encourage you to take those scriptures, Psalm 101:3 and Job 31:1, and really commit those to your heart and mind, and just bask in that and pray and be encouraged that you can have a pure thought life, but you can also have pure eyes. And that's going to be the motivation for this week. So hang in there, keep fighting, and fight for purity, and we'll see you next week. God bless. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the podcast this week. I want to encourage you to check out our website, purelifepodcast.com, for a lot of great blogs and resources and podcasts from previous episodes to help you along in your journey for sexual purity. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on our website, iTunes, and Stitcher Radio. And if you need to contact me for any reason, if you have questions or comments, email me at frank@purelifepodcast.com. That's frank@purelifepodcast.com. See you next week.